In this podcast episode, we'll be talking to Madz Deyzel, a good friend of mine who's doing significant work in the mental health arena. In 2007, Madz founded Grace Counselling at Grace Family Church and directed it for 13 years. She oversaw over 100 volunteer lay counsellors, and between them, they saw 80 to 90 people a week at their counselling centres. Madz has taken this to the next level, opening Edify, Building the Soul organization, which resources lay counsellors in several communities throughout South Africa, ensuring that they get the training that they need to meet the massive demand for counselling today. In this episode, we talk through her observations around the current levels of fatigue and exhaustion that she sees in so many people as they navigate our complex world. We talk practically into how to live intentionally, make decisions, and tackle everyday life, when in reality, we're exhausted, overwhelmed, and have limited capacity for making decisions. It's a fascinating conversation and one that we're keen to continue discussing and unpacking here on the Middle podcast as we focus on the very important topic of mental health in the middle. A reminder that you can listen to this podcast on all major platforms, Google, Apple, Spotify, and more. But for now, let's talk mental health, navigating life with fatigue and limited capacity with Madz Deyzel. Well, Madz, thanks so much for joining us on the Middle podcast. I'm really excited about talking to you today.
Cool. It's good to be here.
And based on the introduction, I think a great starting point would really be to just find out from you, what are you observing out there through the role that you do? You know, where are people getting stuck these days? And what are some of the trends perhaps that you're picking up on?
Yeah. I think a lot of people are just, from an overall perspective, really exhausted. It's been a hectic journey in terms of constantly having to adjust and adapt. And there's a lot of kind of unmet expectations or hope defers in people's kind of mindsets around how they thought life was going to plan out. And I think a lot of times when people kind of feel just completely overwhelmed, they almost slip into this kind of avoidance place. If I just pretend everything around me doesn't exist, then I don't have to face it. And so with people's capacities being really, really low, there's almost a sense of, if I just pretend it's not there, then it'll go away. But it's not actually helping. And I think capacity is a big word. I mean, I don't know if you remember back even to middle of February, I heard people going, man, I'm shattered. And it's only middle of February. And Easter's a long way off. So I think just that sense of incredibly low capacity is one of the biggest themes I'm seeing in people at the moment, especially in the counselling room.
Yeah, I must echo that. I mean, just in the work that we do, it feels like people know what they need to do, or even if they have the tools that they know they need to apply, the capacity isn't even there to apply it.
Yeah, 100%. And so fatigue is massive, you know, and I think with so much change and so much choice, it almost kind of creates this, I actually just don't know what to do. And so it creates almost like a paralysis in the sense of, I just actually don't know which direction to move forward. It's just too overwhelming. So you get a lot of that anxiety around even choice, decision-making, and again, just avoiding many of those spaces out of fears. You know, if I choose solar, will things change? You know, and then it's the wrong choice. If I don't choose solar, will prices go up? I mean, that's just a simple example that even we're feeling in the sense of what to do, and I just don't know.
Would that be what we would call numbing? So it's this idea of like numbing the emotion to not even have to engage with them?
Yeah, I think on an emotional level, definitely there's a numbing, because then I don't have to deal with anything. But I think there's also a lot of mindsets around, I actually just don't know how to process complexity. And so the second there's any kind of complexity, a person just shuts down and rather avoids because it's just too overwhelming. You know, psychologists are actually calling things like this analysis paralysis, as almost a diagnostic term, that there's just, you know, fear of making wrong choices, which choice is the right choice. We end up over analyzing situations and then just like freeze. I can't do anything.
Sure.
And that's that's a big component to this just overwhelming sense of too much. Too
Sure.
much going on, no capacity, and then we end up just hitting pause and not actually doing anything. Keeps a lot of people stuck.
Mm. Okay, so in talking about this with you, you mentioned that this idea of being faithful to your moment. I'm assuming that that's very much about helping people deal with this analysis
Yeah,
paralysis that you're speaking about.
yeah, 100%. When we fear any kind of decision-making process, we end up like I said, just being completely limbo and not doing anything, versus just considering, what can I do with my right now? How can I be faithful to the simple step in front of me? Because one step creates momentum. And often we kind of look at too much of the big picture and we kind of think, I've got to have it all figured out. That just then becomes overwhelming and we freeze, versus going, what do I have energy for right now? It might be just a matter of making yourself a cup of tea, or answering one email, or investigating a price option for whatever it is so it's just all the kind of little moments add up to something great. But if we just fix our minds on the big stuff, it becomes overwhelming, versus focus on what's in front of you right now and be faithful to that moment.
I love that question. What do I have energy for right now? I think that's powerful. We speak about it a lot in the middle, the idea of many milestones all adding up, and taking your eye off the big end picture, which can quite often be overwhelming, and looking at the small steps that you can take to get there. But you're really talking about doing that on a daily basis and in the moment, deciding what you have energy for in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in end of 2019, if we can go back that far, pre-COVID concepts, I remember at the end of that year, so many people that I was counseling were just saying things like, I'm absolutely exhausted. It's been a crazy year. Next year, 2020, I want to kind of have 2020 vision. I want to change my pace. I kind of want to plan better. and everyone has these kind of ideas of choosing a word for the year. And my word at the end of 2019 for 2020 was plodding.
Yeah.
And it's the most sexiest word out there, not. But I just thought, what? I want to plod this year. I don't want to get to the end of the year again exhausted. How can I just find a rhythm that is sustainable? Because often we just have these sprints and starts. And yes, there might be moments where you need to kind of sprint because there's a big event or something coming up. But to find a sustainable rhythm, and man, I'm so glad I started the year with that mindset, because when COVID hit, obviously it didn't change much. But I think plodding is an underrated word. And when I reflect back over chunks of time, plodding has actually what has brought the most momentum to my journeys. It's kind of, you don't see it drastically when you're in it day by day, but over a period of time, plodding adds up, and that's what's amazing about it.
Yeah, and plodding, I mean, when I get into most corporates or when I speak to most people, I think most people are sprinting.
Yeah.
All the time. And I guess that has a consequence. You can't, if you just look at it purely through a running analogy, you can't sprint all the time and not come out the other end having damaged yourself.
Burnt out. Yeah.
So yeah, and we'll talk about that as we go. It's how do we get ourselves into a sustainable rhythm in how we go about living life. And I think what I'm hearing you say, it's not just about the external circumstances. Plodding for you, that has something to do with also how you process things inwardly. Because I'm hearing you say that being faithful to your moment, focusing on what's right in front of you right now, that minimizes the sense of being overwhelmed by all the other stuff that you can also pay attention to.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. I definitely find it helps you kind of right size what's urgent, what's important, and gives you a bit more clarity in the now. Otherwise, sometimes it feels like you're walking around in circles, touching everything that needs to be done, but not doing anything.
Yeah, no.
Um,
You definitely fall into that trap when you look at everything
mm,
that you've got to do and you don't know where to start. And you end up spending 30 to 40 minutes trying to figure out where to
yeah,
start. You end up not getting anything done.
100%.
So this is really
Yeah.
about managing the moment right in front of you,
Hmm.
being focused on that and tackling these things one step at a time.
Yeah.
But also in the moment deciding what you have energy for. I mean, what happens if we don't have the energy for important stuff? I think that might be what people
Mm.
might be asking.
Then I guess you need to consider also what are weights that you're carrying that don't belong to you, that,
Mm,
are kind of becoming holes in your buckets that drain you, because often people put expectations on you. They put deadlines, and some of it is pertainable and some of it's actually just not yours. And the thing about a weight is you can pick up a 2 kg dumbbell and it's not heavy in the moment, but if you keep holding on to it over a period of time, it gets heavier and heavier.
mm,
And that often adds to the drain in terms of people's capacities, is these expectations that we place on ourselves, or these guilt weights of what I should be doing or shouldn't be doing that actually doesn't belong to me, that makes my capacity for what is important really hard to notice. And so sometimes just taking a step back and going, what am I holding that's not mine? What are some of the holes in my bucket that need to be patched up because I'm holding on to them, it's draining me. And so kind of almost doing a recalculation stock of
mm.
where you're at, and what's draining you can be really helpful to just create capacity. And sometimes it creates it quicker than we realize, because a lot of people can spend hours ruminating over some of these things that they're holding that doesn't belong to them.
Yeah.
And when you ruminate, you put so much mental and emotional energy into those conversations in your mind that often you never even have, and it just fuels anger stuff and bitterness stuff, and it drains your emotional tank. And you can, I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes you can have those ruminating conversations at 2 o'clock in the morning, and 2 hours later you're still arguing in your head and you've got nowhere. um,
Yeah.
and so it's even considering from a mental health perspective, what are some of the narratives in your mind that are playing on repeat, that are draining your energy tank. And so kind of almost like a defrag, sometimes we've got to clean up our mental mess,
Yeah.
so that we have capacity again for what is our responsibilities and important.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful, eh? And I think if we all, take stock of the narratives in our head, as you're saying,
Mm,
it's so true. We do, and maybe we don't all realize just how much expenditure there is from a
mm,
mental and an emotional energy point of view when we are doing
yeah,
that ruminating in our heads,
yeah. Well, just quick stat on that. You have on average 70,000 thoughts a day. Of those thoughts, like 80% of them are negative. And of those that are negative, 98% of them are repetitive. So
Wow.
just consider, like, actually how many of your thoughts are just ruminating negative thoughts.
Wow. That's a powerful
Mm.
stat.
Yeah, scary.
So, so I mean, we're talking two things here. Part of the battle is one in your head and addressing the narrative, addressing the
Mm.
negative thoughts. I mean, just by eradicating half of the repetitive thoughts, we're going to claim a lot of space there.
Yeah.
But the other, as you said, is that mental defrag. It's looking at your life and being very clear on responsibilities or weights, as you call them, that you potentially
Mm.
shouldn't be carrying.
Mm.
And as much as you feel you don't have the capacity to deal with them, by dealing with them, in essence, it's typical sharpening the saw stuff. You're going to
Yeah.
recapture that energy by being intentional about shifting those weights.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
and I know how people might be feeling. That still means that they have to do the work, hey? But there's no way around this, really.
No.
Yeah.
Whatever you put in is what you're going to get out. And at
Mm.
the same time, if your output exceeds your input, your upkeep is your downfall. And it's that kind of chicken or the egg analogy thing, in the sense of going, I've got two choices here. If I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to keep getting what I'm getting. And at some point we have to recalculate. And so even if it's a matter of going, how do I just carve a space in my diary for self-care, where I step back, I put down social media, I put down the cell phone, I turn off notifications, I make a cup of tea, and I go, right, how do I recalculate where I am? I mean, that's what I love about maps. Google Maps, it's constantly recalculating. If you hit a dead end or you got a flat tire, it's like sometimes you've got to just stop and recalculate. And I think we underestimate the power of that moment. And again, that's being faithful to you now. Faithful to you now doesn't always mean I have to be making a step forward. It could just be a recalculating moment around, what am I carrying that's excess baggage that I need to let go of? So, yeah.
Yeah, in the middle, we talk about the idea of a plan versus the plan. And, whilst we want to reach the goal, we don't, if we're rigid about our plan, then we won't be doing that recalculation that you're speaking about. You term it as being married to the vision, yet dating the path. I mean, just expand on that a bit for us.
Well, I think everyone has dreams and ideas and hopes and expectations of how anything's going to plan out. I mean, I remember a lot of the people that I counseled towards the end of 2020 were matriculants. How they thought their matric year was going to go, how they planned for their matric year was nothing like what it ended up being. And I said, well, what is your goal? Your goal is to pass the year. How you get there may look very, very different. And that's the key, is that flexibility and adaptability are so crucial, because life's always going to throw curveballs and put up roadblocks, and there's going to be traffic jams. And considering alternative paths is so crucial. Now, what we see happen when a person is married to their vision and they're married to their path, like, well, this is my strategy, this is how I'm going to get there, they become almost fixated on the journey, on the path, on how they think it's going to play out. And when we become fixated, it almost narrows our mindsets, and it then triggers kind of these kind of emotional distresses when it doesn't go according to plan, that almost blocks creativity. So when I become rigid in my thinking, rigid in my focus, and then I hit a curveball, that panic will shut down your cognitive thinking mind, shut down your creativity, and keep you stuck. Versus if you already approach your journey with a level of flexibility, it's kind of like as a surfer, and I know you understand this analogy, you can't surf a wave with straight legs. You've got to keep your knees bent, because at any moment, the lip could throw, there could be a back, wave that comes your path. You've got to keep on your toes, your knees bent, so that you can constantly adapt and adjust as the wave progresses, because there's no two waves that are the same. And so that agility, that flexibility are such crucial kind of tools that we need for navigating the journey ahead of us, the terrain ahead of us. And it allows us to not get stuck in this rigidity or panic, which then therefore blocks off our creative thinking. So if you start any journey, any vision with a level of adaptability, then you're not going to hit a panic when a curveball gets thrown in your way. Does that make sense? You have the ability to be able to think quicker on your feet in terms of looking for alternative solutions.
Yeah. Look, thank you for calling me a surfer. It's been many years. I appreciate that.
I put myself in that bracket too. Many years.
But what's going through my mind as you speak. So yes, I completely agree. The panic comes when we hit the detour. I think another result of that rigidity, and I'm saying this out of my own experience, is because we become so fixated on the plan, it also causes us to, I think it amplifies the weight attachment that you were speaking about earlier, because we sometimes think that those weights are just part and parcel of what we are meant to be carrying, because this is the way.
Yeah.
And I reflect on a recent conversation where somebody was in a really tough position at work, and when I just said to them, why is this path, the path that
Mm.
you think that you have to walk. You couldn't actually answer the question from an authentic place. It was more out of an expected place. And the more we got into
Yeah.
it, so, well, maybe there's a different way. All of a
Yeah.
sudden there was this space and this lightness that could actually,
Yeah.
am I just doing this because I've been told that this is what I'm meant to do, or this is an expectation that
Mm.
I've placed on myself unfairly? That
Yeah.
flexibility goes right into everything that we do in life.
Yeah. And often if how I thought it was going to play out is not playing out, we interpret that through the lens of I have failed.
Mm,
And that then, increases those weights of then how do I prove my value? How do I prove my worth? By showing that I can find a way through this way, versus adaptability. So if the path that you're on, if the plan that you've taken, if the route that you thought it was going to be is not it, it doesn't mean you've failed. I think staying stuck is more of a failure than considering an alternative route.
that's
But
good.
if my mindset is that this route, it determines my worth, my ability, my skill set, if I'm successful or not, then again, that's going to expedite that whole sense of failure, which then creates the fear and the rigidity. So I think, again, it's the narrative you tell yourself about what you expect of yourself, even on the journey.
And so much of that is about identity, isn't it?
100%.
You know,
Yeah.
where does your identity lie?
Yeah.
And I guess it's harder as we get older, but we
Mm.
found our worth in what we do.
Yeah.
And as soon as things don't go well in that space, then we try and fight our way through it rather than, in many ways, reading what's going on and making the adjustments. That's this
Yeah.
potential gift, as a moment, not necessarily a moment of just adversity and challenge.
100%. Well, in 2022, I found it really interesting that about 80% of my clients had shifted from a performance-driven identity to an avoidance-driven one. And I was like, this is really fascinating. I'm wondering why. And as I counsel people, part of my mind is in the place of counseling, and a part of my mind is kind of analyzing what I'm seeing consistently, as I talk to people's stories day in and day out. You start to see patterns and kind of rhythms. And I realized that because the terrain had changed so drastically through COVID, that it kind of created like an anxiety in the people, in the sense of going, I know how to play in this kind of field with these rules and these expectations and outcomes. But now the rules of the game keep changing. It's kind of online, it's in person, we can go out, we can't, we can wear masks. There was so much change around what was allowed and what wasn't allowed, that it created huge levels of anxiety. And because there was so much change in such a quick space of time, that everyone just pendulum swung to this avoidance, because there was such a fear of failure, which, when you dig into the roots of either a performance or an avoidance-driven identity, both are underpinned by this mindset of that who I am is determined by what I can do. And if I fear the potential of failure, then it creates panic. And the interesting thing even about stress is directly related to the narrative you tell yourself around whether you're going to succeed or failure, or you're going to fail. So if the story you're telling yourself is, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I'm going to fail, automatically your stress goes up, which means your creative thinking, brain shuts down. If the narrative you tell yourself is, even if I fail, it's okay, I'm a great person, I'm creative, I'm secure in who I am. If the internal narrative is positive, then failure doesn't become something that you fear. It just becomes another learning moment. So understanding the tie between value, self-worth, our internal narratives, our external performances, failures and success is really crucial, because they're so intertwined, and they feed off each other unless we intentionally pull them apart.
Sure. So I mean, if one just had to put time and energy into deeply considering where their identity is rooted,
Yeah.
as a foundation to shifting their narrative.
Mm.
Because I think those two are quite intrinsically linked. If my identity is rooted in performance, then my narrative is going to be very built around my current level of performance.
Yep.
And performance is something
Yep.
that's in many ways decided by the people around you, as well as your own internal beliefs around what it means to be successful in whatever it is that you do.
Completely. Well, I use the whole America's Got Talent analogy for this space.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that Simon Cowell's the most critical judge, and there even been performers who will come back year in and year out to try and change the opinion of the most critical judge in their world, which in this case would be Simon. Now, the reality is what gives that person the right to have the power to determine your value? Now, there's a big difference between, again, performance and value, but if they're interlinked and my performance is badly critiqued, then I'm going to determine my value as being a failure. And so we're not separating behavior from identity. And I do this a lot even with high school students. I get them to write on a marker pen my value. So they put a sticky label on the marker pen, and I said, right, now consider, who are you giving this marker pen to? Because the minute you hand that marker pen to anybody, it can be your peer group, it can be a teacher, it can be a boss if you're in the workplace, it can be somebody who's doing your annual evaluations. If you give your value to that person, and however that person scores you, you link that directly back to your value, it's going to automatically create massive amounts of anxieties, because it puts you in a place of uncertainty. And uncertainty will always create anxiety, because it leaves you in a position of powerlessness. Like, you have no power over the end judgment that person's going to have over your value. And so this is why it's so crucial that we separate value from performance. And even when I speak to parents about this, if your kid is behaving badly, don't label their identity by their behavior. Oh, you are bad, disrespectful boy. No, you are loved, but your behavior is disrespectful. So we've got to separate identity from behavior. It's really important.
All right. So, in really supporting people to navigate out of this analysis paralysis, this brain freeze, this tiredness. So one of the things you're saying is, let's start to separate our behavior from our identity, and let's start to reaffirm ourselves with regard to the value that we bring to all the situations that we're in, and then use the behaviors, and whether we fail or whether we don't, to learn and to grow, and to I suppose strengthen and amplify the way that we add value. Would that be a good starting point?
100%. You are not what you do. You're so much greater than that. And if you can just, like you say, take restock of these spaces, it's going to free your capacity to explore, to be creative, to initiate. Failure doesn't become something we fear then. It becomes just stepping stones to potential greater success. But if your identity is caught up in it, then you'll never take those leaps of faith. So I definitely think separation is so crucial.
I think for some people listening, it might be a case of saying, hey, maybe it's also an opportunity to step into a completely different space, because potentially I've just remained here because I've thought this is who I am, and this is all I've ever known. And that's comfortable, but that's not necessarily going to create both the life that you're looking for, as well as, I suppose, tap into the full potential that you've got to offer.
100%. I mean, for years I thought I was stupid because I was dyslexic. I didn't realize I was dyslexic. I was petrified of the fact that I can't spell. And so it held me back. I feel like I've got so much to say in terms of training and empowering people. But I needed to find alternative platforms to express that onto. But I was petrified of writing because I can't spell, And then I started realizing how much my value was caught up in my ability to spell. And I worked hard on separating that. Now I tell people I am a confidently bad speller, and I rely on Grammarly and editors. It's okay, So it opened up so many new doors when you can separate fear, value from just skill sets. it doesn't actually do you any favors when you keep them together. And the more you can separate it, the more, it's totally opened up incredible doors of being able to write, develop courses, publish books, where, I'm no longer fearful of, an aspect of my skill set that is not strong, but it doesn't stop me from being able to produce and express what I know inside of me. So it's really liberating when you start to find that kind of freedom.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you're an author, so that's an incredible demonstration of applying what you're teaching here. And I think the other step is, we talk about what we focus on expands, and by paying attention to the positive things around us, by practicing gratitude, by looking at the things that are, working, I guess, rather than paying so much attention to the negative thoughts and that step that you said, 80%, that would do a lot to shift the dynamics that are going on in our brain and the emotional energy expenditure that we give into the negative thoughts.
Yeah. We have to change the narrative.
Yeah.
We have to reframe our lenses. These are all terms we use in the counseling room. What is the story you're telling yourself? Is it truth? What is an alternative story you can tell yourself? And the crazy thing about our minds is that it has the ability to gather any evidence to back up the story it's already telling itself. If the story is negative, you're going to find negative evidence. If you change your narrative, you're going to start to see new potentials because you're looking for evidence to back up whatever narrative it is you're telling yourself.
Yeah. Madz, I think I'd really like to, there's so much here that I feel is going to hook a lot of people in, because, pretty much everything that you're saying, I can certainly identify with. I know that people that I'm working with can identify with. So to come back and to unpack it in more detail with you on a regular basis would really be, I think, very worthwhile. So if you don't mind,
Awesome.
I think having you as a frequent guest would be a privilege for us here at the middle.
Cool. Ditto. I'm amped.
Any other just wrap up comments from you before we close?
I guess just a little word of encouragement is never judge your heart by your capacity. Often aware that we're failing people because we're exhausted. We're aware that we're failing maybe your kids or your spouse or work colleagues, friends, whatever it is, because of our capacity. And we need to learn to separate the heart and our capacity. And I often say to people, because people find it really hard to let people down if their capacity is like, empty. So I'll say to them, tell someone, my heart would love to, but right now my capacity just can't. And that becomes almost like a bit of a get out of jail free card for some people who are very guilt driven by needing to say yes to everything. So express your heart, but draw a line with your capacity. It'll buy you margin so that your heart can actually do what it needs to do maybe 2 weeks down the line because you've bought yourself recovery space. So don't judge your heart by your capacity.
That's brilliant. I think that'll be a great next conversation just around boundaries and how to take that further.
Oh yeah, so good.
So many topics. And then Madz, just I know that we've got the Made Whole conference coming up on the 22nd of June. So just a quick 1 minute punt of that. What is it about and where can people sign up?
So the Made Whole conference is actually a two-day event, 22nd, 23rd of June. We've got about 11 speakers talking into 15 different topics. So it's a real buffet around a variety of kind of mental health issues that relate to the spirit, soul, and the body. In other words, our spirituality, our cognitive thinking abilities, and our physical body. So things like functional depression, burnout, the myths of medication, how to manage weight worries and weariness. We're looking at the porn pandemic. We're looking at addiction cycles. We're looking at the gender narrative. There's so many topics out there that people just don't have good, healthy information around, which creates almost like a limited narrative that keeps people stuck because we don't actually know how to engage in it. We're looking at cultural mindsets that often keep people in bondage. I've counseled people who've turned to alcohol abuse because they cannot carry the weight of a cultural mindset or expectation placed on them from years of kind of cultural routines and rituals and things like that. And then you're speaking on healthy teams. We kind of we just want to speak into such a plethora of topics that we regularly see in the counseling room, and often it's because of a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. We understand the spectrum of resources for physical health. We don't understand the spectrum of resources for mental health. And so I kind of want to bring some of the leading voices in our country into one space where we can give people tools to better understand that. It's both in person here up in Joburg and Randburg, or you can get live streaming tickets if you're not able to travel. You can find the link on my website, Edify-Building the Soul, or my social media pages, Madz Deyzel, or you can check out NCCB Church. A lot of the links are on their website as well.
Yeah, and I'll share those
22nd,
links,
23rd
Matt.
of June.
So yeah, I'll make sure I share the
Perfect.
links. So, but listen, thank you so
Okay,
much
cool.
for the work that you're doing. You really are a voice of authority in these spaces. So I'm definitely
Thanks,
going
Trav.
to be continuing this conversation with you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Mads.